Okay, again, I want to thank everyone for joining us, and I want to introduce our our congressman, actually, Congressman Hank Johnson of the 4th Congressional District, which represents Gwinnett, Rockdale, all of Rockdale, parts of Gwinnett, DeKalb County, and Newton County. And I introduce you, Congressman Hank Johnson.
Thank you, Zoran, and good afternoon, everyone out there who is viewing this panel discussion in commemoration of the events of January 6, 2021, the insurrection. This was a day, January 6, 2021, that will live, in the words of FDR, it will live in infamy, just like December the 7th of 1941. But only January 6th was not an attack on our democracy from a foreign invader. It was an attack on our democracy by domestic insurgents, the most dangerous threat to yours and my liberty, a threat from within. And to this day, this uprising, this insurrection, had at its very core the issue of white supremacy. It is the moral dilemma that has plagued this country since its inception, and it has not been acknowledged or dealt with to the extent that it enables her people, America's people, to move forward. And that's what was exposed on January 6th of 2021. Yes, it was a violent insurrection, an attempt to overthrow the results of a full, free, and fair election. But it was more than that. It has been followed by a series of actions that have filtered down to the states and even to the local level, where you have school board officials being threatened and intimidated, and you have election administration officials, volunteers mainly, being threatened and coerced and intimidated so that they will be malleable when the next election comes. And they will be relied upon to change the results of that election. And so that's what we face. We face the threat to our democracy, to our very core right to vote. And it's all based on white supremacy. Make America Great Again was a harken back to a time when white males dominated. That's why we saw Confederate flags being paraded through the Capitol on January 6th. That's why we saw a hangman's noose, a symbol of terror, that was on display on the grounds of the Capitol, ready to lynch whomever may have met their misfortune on that day. And fortunately, due to the heroic efforts of the Capitol Hill Police Department and the Washington, D.C. Police Department, they held the line. They protected us. And I want to thank them for allowing me to be here today to have this discussion with you. I want to thank these tremendous panelists for agreeing to discuss this subject today. They are people of faith, and they are people who operate in the secular realm as well. But I have found in my 67 years of living that there really is no difference between those two worlds. They are one. We choose to bring into that world what our core beliefs are. And so it is so important that people come away from this discussion today with some food that enables them to grow as human beings and grow closer to your fellow human being. We may not look alike, but we're the same. And so that's what this discussion is going to be about. That aspect, as well as the fact that we need to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We need to pass the Freedom to Vote Act. We need to deal with HR 40 a study for reparations. And there's so many other things that we can do on the public policy side. So that's what this discussion is all about. And with that, I want to turn it over to my friend, Reverend Dr. Cynthia Hale, the pastor of the Ray of Hope Christian Church in Decatur, Georgia, who I've asked to moderate this discussion, but to begin it with a prayer. Pastor Hale.
Thank you so much, Congressman Hank Johnson, for all you do to move this nation towards justice and equality for all, and especially for convening us for this very important and necessary conversation. Let's begin with prayer. Great God of the universe, creator of the world and all who inhabit it, you created us in your image and likeness as social beings for relationship with you and one another. After creating the world and all that's in it, you said that it was good, very good. Now, God, the world that you created good is in peril, especially our nation. The people you created for community are experiencing disunity, division, and polarization. We need your wisdom and courage to overcome the hate that is becoming more and more pervasive, and learn to love, to be kind and just to one another as you are to us. Thank you for blessing our discussion and the wisdom that will be shared. May all who hear be better and do better because of it. It's in your strong and mighty name that we pray and give you praise. Amen. Let me take this opportunity to welcome all of you who have joined us. We are grateful for your presence and your interest. It is with much pleasure that I introduce this esteemed group of men and women who join me on the panel. Bishop Reginald T. Jackson, presiding prelate of the 6th Episcopal District of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Dr. Lawrence Carter, Dean of the Martin Luther King Jr. Chapel at Morehouse College. Imam Pleman T. Elamine, he's the Imam Emeritus of Atlanta Masjid of Al-Islam. Rabbi Ellen Nimhauser, President of Interfaith Atlanta. Dr. Alan Abramovich, Alban W. Barkley Professor of Political Science, Emory University. Reverend Amantha Barbie of Oakhurst Presbyterian Church in Decatur, Georgia. And Dr. William H. Boone, Professor of Political Science, Clark Atlanta University. These are the brightest and the best, the creme de la creme, men and women who have a heart for justice and equality. And as I said to them earlier, they're intelligent men and women. And so we want them to share freely of their thoughts. As the congressman has made clear to us, we have gathered on the anniversary of the violent insurrection of the Capitol. It was an assault to our democracy that was witnessed all around the world, and many were in shock and disbelief as they saw men and women storm the Capitol, fighting police officers, breaching security, battering through windows and doors to violate what was once considered sacred space. And I'm not just talking about the property, but our democracy. The question that no doubt many were asking on that day and continue to ask is, what in the world is happening to us? I think we all know what happened on January the 6th. The congressman has made it clear to us today and why it happened. But I want to begin today with this question. How have the events of January the 6th affected us as a nation? What has it done to us individually and collectively? Now, I've already shared with the panel that they are free to either one, any of them can begin, and we will have this dialogue together. Who wants to start?
And not everybody at the same time.
That's right, because if you don't volunteer, I'm going to volunteer you. Okay, why don't we start with Dr. Carter?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. But after that question, I feel like I'm in trouble now. Thinking about all of this, the whole experience a year ago was a real stunner. I did not see it coming. Some of my friends did. But when you think about it, the aftermath of violence is always trauma.
Mm.
And America has gone through a trauma. The nation went through a major trauma, especially after the Civil War. We won't talk about the trauma that the African natives had in the Middle Passage, being arrested against their wishes and arriving on our shores and discovering that they had been classified as Blacks, which was the time that the term whites became current.
Mm.
So the trauma that the Emancipation Proclamation attempted to deal with the beginning of the first Reconstruction, was almost dead on arrival, because not only did journalists, American journalists, but American theologians and pastors attacked it. So we have a theological problem, a journalistic problem. And you can just probably go right down the other professional list and how there were contributions that ended the first Reconstruction about 1894, the time Benjamin Mays was born. Well, we have had a series of traumas nationally and individually ever since, trying to establish one simple fact, that the African natives are also human beings, people of humanity from a different culture. But that has not come through as quickly as we thought it would after the Emancipation Proclamation, and legislatively since, because we've had to have amendments to the Constitution to even correct the Constitution created by people who wanted a more perfect union, who were owners of slaves. And so this, in our DNA, is a lot of inhumanity in the national DNA, and an inequality and injustice. So what I'm simply talking about is disrespect for the category of the person. The person is not respected as a category in the American culture. And now we are stunned to know that half of the voting population do not think that minorities are equal. And they don't want us to be. Lest I should talk too long, let me pause there and give someone else a chance.
Thank you, sir, for those words. Professor, go right ahead.
All
Okay.
right, thank you very much.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, I don't know which.
No.
I was
I'm
saying
sorry,
which professor
Professor.
you're talking about.
Professor Allen had his hand lifted.
Okay.
And then next
Okay,
year.
very good.
Okay, thank
Too
you.
many professors here.
I know.
Well, those words are very well spoken. And I guess the things that I've taken away from what happened a year ago were, first of all, that what stunned me on that day and in the immediate aftermath was the violence that took place in the Capitol, the intensity of that violence and the willingness of the people who went there to engage in that sort of extreme violence against their fellow human beings, regardless of what they believed about, about the election. What's really disturbed me just as much since then has been the willingness of so many of our fellow Americans, particularly so many of the leaders of the Republican Party, in the Congress and elsewhere, to not only go along with the efforts of the former president to overturn the election results, but the big lie about the stolen election, but to increasingly downplay the significance of what happened a year ago, and pretend that it wasn't really that bad, or maybe it wasn't really Trump supporters who were there in the Capitol and engaging in violence. Maybe these were Antifa or some others. Total nonsense, of course. So what we've seen even today is that we see one of our two major political parties is in thrall to a leader who continues to spew lies, who continues to spew hatred. And this is very, very disturbing. And yes, I think Congressman Johnson is exactly right to point to the issue of race as quite central to all of this. The efforts to overturn the election results focused very heavily, not just on a few swing states, yes, a few swing states, of course, like Georgia, but also which voters within those states were they focusing on? And which voters have they been focused on ever since then in trying to make it more difficult for Americans to vote? It's primarily African-American voters and other voters of color. And I think a large part of what drove those insurrectionists and drives many of the supporters of the former president is this belief that somehow the votes cast by African-Americans in particular, but voters of color in general, are not quite legitimate, that it's not to be believed. And therefore, it's all right to try to restrict their access to the polls. And I think that is one of the central issues in all of this. It continues to be. And so I was very glad to see President Biden and Vice President Harris speak out very forcefully today. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, saw what they had to say. To underline the central role the former president played in inciting this violence, and inciting these efforts to overturn elections, and the continued threat. This of course did not end when the insurrection was put down. It continues to this day.
Thank you, sir. I think Dr. Boone, you wanted to go next?
Just a few words. Thank you. And thanks very much for this invitation. I'm elated to be on this panel with folk, but some of whom I know, many of whom I do not know, but I certainly know congressmen. But let me say this, that the events of January 6th, 1 year ago, I think brings into sharp relief that the country is deeply divided, that the country is a place that is not the exemplar that we tend to try to promote, and that we're not an exception. And it's caused us, I think, to once again come to a point of reckoning, in terms of questions of race, questions of inequality at all levels. It all plays out in this whole business of January 6th. I think that's the question here. But I, like Professor Abramovich, am deeply concerned that the reaction of state legislatures across the country, not an insignificant number, by the way, more than half of the country's state legislatures, especially those controlled by Republican legislators, have used this opportunity, this particular moment in history, to enact legislation to suppress the vote, and in many instances to discourage the vote. This is the reaction we're getting. And all of these actions are based upon what everyone knows is a lie. There's an old blues song called "Who You Can Believe, Me or Your Lying Eyes?" And the question here is that in plain sight, we're having the country's democracy being undermined legitimately through state legislatures and laws. And so this kind of reckoning, so the whole question of race, but to expand it beyond the question of race, there's also the question of certain other demographics in the American polity that are now under attack. And we look at people of color, we look at younger people. It appears that one political party stands afraid of all of these elements in the body politic in a way that they feel necessary to gerrymander districts in a way that for the next decade will attempt to ensure their presence and their authority within state legislative bodies, and even within the US Congress, the House itself. So we have a problem there with that. And I think these are the kinds of questions that need to be addressed. And I think that none of us, I would argue, should be surprised at what happened on January 6th. Certainly the intensity may be of surprise, but one has to go back and contextualize this in the context of American history. In the context of American history, there's been this blinder kind of phenomenon in terms that any threat to America was outside threat, and that the domestic terrorists that were reigning supreme in the 1930s and 1940s and on through the 50s and 60s were of no great threat to the body politic or democracy of America. And I'm talking specifically here about as far back as the 1930s, 1940s, when J. Edgar Hoover refused, especially in the 1960s, to moving away against racist, white supremacist elements that were attempting to undermine peaceful demonstrations by people of color, in particular African Americans. So I think we should look at this in that long term and see that we have not really corrected the structures themselves that need to be addressed. One of the things that has troubled me, Congressman and other folk on this panel, is this discussion about when something happens, we talk about the systemic nature of things. It's less the systemic nature than the structural problems that we have in American society. We need to look at these structures. The structures themselves are what we need to look at, the judicial structure itself. And in some would even argue the Electoral College. But at any point, we're talking here about something far wider than some momentary, some aberrational kinds of things. These are things that are embedded in the American system.
Thank you, sir. Congressman, I believe you want to jump in at this point.
No, I had my hand raised by mistake. Please proceed. I do want to jump in, but I want to hear from our panelists also.
Well, let me throw a couple other things out there. And I really appreciate Congressman Johnson for pulling this together, as well as the opening remarks. So that this white supremacy and racism is, as everybody knows, it's at the core of it. And it's, as America diversifies, the white supremacy expands. So it's not just about us African Americans, it's about anybody that's not white. And really, it also goes over into anybody that's not white male as well. So I just want to remind us, I know you know all of this, but they had 8 years of seething and bringing this up because they hated the Obama presidency. And they really hated what everything Obama stood for. And so in hating that, you also ended up having to hate civility. You had to hate diplomacy. You had to hate dignity, intelligence, all these things that personify Barack Obama and his leadership. You had to become opposed to that. And in reminding you also about those 8 years and what was going on in the hearts and minds of these people, that not just the ones that came out on January 6th, but as you say, almost 50% of the voting population. But that kind of hate also, it was manifested of how they were going to go in the Republican primary. We just remind you of how many candidates there were and how rude and disrespectful Donald Trump was to all of them. And many of them were trying to deal with Trump and trying to behave in a respectful way, but they couldn't. And so the Republican Party put all of their apples on this particular man, because they saw him as being the most opposite of Barack Obama, in my opinion. And he vocalized that, and he was reactionary. His whole 4 years was reactionary movements against whatever Obama had done. So the other point is that this white supremacy that is at the root of America's dilemma, it has built itself as nationalism, and that's how Trump got it connected with these folk, is America first. And sometimes he was talking about America, want to get back to America of the 50s, 1950s and 56, and which was not a great time for many of us. But they were able to disguise their white supremacy and their nationalistic vanity as if it was patriotism, because they were talking about America of 50, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, and not the American dream that most of us have been aspiring towards. And so it's a fear of losing importance and the fear of meaninglessness, that their lives do not have meaning because diverse people of color are coming into prominence. And so all of that, just to remind us that they pushed upon a nationalistic vanity, pretending to be patriotism, but at the same time, a self-righteousness that refused to compromise with anything other than white males and extremists.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
I think that what Clement Elamine just told us is that there is a huge group of people in America who are willing to demonize excellence in order to win. That's what we're up against.
Dr. Hale asked us about our individual and collective responses. As I watched January 6th a year ago, I wasn't surprised, but extremely disappointed. We as Americans have been raised to believe that we are being raised and reared in the finest country in the world. And when reality stares us in the face, it's a disappointment that is quite painful. It was so painful that we could not even care for the human beings inside the building. It wasn't about Republican or Democrat. It was there are human beings whose lives are at stake in that building, and we can't find the strength in ourselves to care. And that does absolutely affect us collectively. What has happened? We've come to a point of division that I certainly never thought I'd see. And we have a healing that we have absolutely no knowledge as to where to begin. So much damage has been done, and I agree that the 8 years of Barack Obama was so upsetting to many. That we'll show you has become the mentality. We'll show you. But where is that core, that strength that comes in solidarity? There is an uprising, if you will, of I've got to be right no matter what. And it is destroying the fiber of our existence as Americans. And until we can recreate, redirect, reaffirm who we are as individuals and a collective a nation, we will suffer. And we have not seen the end of it. We know it's not the end because our former president continues to be in the forefront of our reality every single day, which means we have not healed. We think of the word anniversary, think about celebration. There are some people celebrating today, and we can never forget that. There are some people celebrating for what happened a year ago. And we are a country in pain, and we can never, ever forget that.
Thank you. We are a country in pain. We are broken. We are divided. We're more diverse than we have ever been. And yet we're more divided.
If I can go back, and thank you as well for inviting me along, to what Dr. Carter said about we are in a time of trauma, or we are, post-traumatic event. We are in this post-traumatic time, and we're not the first nation to experience this kind of violence and hatred and acrimony between groups, and we need to look at the other as models. We like to think of ourselves as models here in the United States, but we need to look at other countries who've done really deep and meaningful work facing their ugly past, their ugly truth, and do reconciliation. We have models in South Africa, in Germany, in Canada. 2 days ago, Canada assigned $31.5 billion to Indigenous children who were separated from their parents. We did wrong. We looked ourselves straight in the eye and we said, we've made mistakes. And why we as Americans can't look ourselves in the eye and say, we've made mistakes. We need to do truth and reconciliation, and let that be the education, whether it's in the school system, whether it's in our places of worship, amongst our communal groups. We need to do this education, and we need to look at our ugly truth. And it also resonates for me, this idea of the fear that someone has to experience such grave fear to act in the way they behaved at this day last year. And Isabel Wilkerson really emphasizes what Dean Carter said with regard to the fear of having something taken away from you. The mortality rate has gone higher and higher for every group of Americans, except because of thank God, the advances in medicine and healthcare, except for the white middle-aged man. And that has not gone up, it's gone down in the last 2 decades because of the fear of having, she surmises, the fear of having their position in society shrinking or being taken away. And when in reality, we all know it's not being taken away, it's being reconciled with, or attempting to be reconciled with, the rest of society. So I don't want to end on such a horrid note. I think about incredible poetry of our young poet laureate and inaugural poet, Amanda Gorman, when at the end of her New Year's poem, she says, "Know what we fought need not be forgotten, nor for none. It defines us, binds us as one. Come over, join this day, just begin, for wherever we come together, wherever we come together, we will forever overcome." So it's about coming together in our religious groups, our educational institutions, our communal, whatever groups we commune with others. It's about learning, reconciling, and being together to make a better nation.
Thank you.
Dr.
Rabbi,
Hale?
yes.
Yeah, Bishop Jackson, let me thank Congressman Johnson for the invitation to be on this panel. And let me say I'm happy to join with the other panelists. This time a year ago, in fact, I was sitting in the same spot at my desk in my study and turned on the television and saw the insurrection on Capitol Hill. And the first thing that came to my mind, this is really about Make America Great Again. About a time when this nation, really the control was in the hands of white men. Donald Trump represented that time when white men ran the country. And that's what this is all about, the diversity of the country, the civil rights, voting rights, all of that is an affront. There was a time not long ago when we talked about the angry white male. And I could never understand what they were angry about because they controlled most everything. The levers of government, the levers of the business community, they were running everything. And unfortunately, there's about almost 40% of this country's population today, which still believe to make America great again means you have to turn back time to that period. This country is more polarized than it has ever been. I don't think it's a coincidence that a year ago today, you saw the Confederate flag being waved through the great rotunda of the Capitol. Again, make America great again. I think this country is going to have a very difficult time, and I suspect that the future of our democracy is going to be decided within the next couple of weeks. Immediately after January the 6th, you saw all of these states, 49 states, with almost 400 bills, most of them intended to suppress and make it harder for people of color to vote. So that in fact, the levers of power, the leadership of the country will still be determined by white men. And if the Congress does not pass federal legislation, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and the other bill, if they do not carve out something for the filibuster so that these bills have a chance to be acted on, I think you're signaling the end to our democracy. These bills which have passed make it possible, even if you disagree with the will of the American people, you have your people in place who can decide who it is they want to be the winners of elections. This is a very, very perilous time for our country. And anybody who does not believe that this country is tottering and not sure which way it's going to finally tilt, I think they're living in denial. In fact, for a long time, and maybe even still, this country is living in denial. And I have a definition for denial: don't even know I am lying. For a long time, this nation has lived in denial. And I'm afraid that reality may hit when it's too late.
Thank you so much, Bishop Jackson. Let me check with the congressman and see if you want to, all of the panelists have spoken at this point, sir. Before we shift, do you want to have any comments?
Well, I've just been impressed with what I've heard. I do think that the Obama presidency caused what we can call not a backlash, but a blacklash. You could see the hate in the eye of Donald Trump while he was seated and subject to Barack Obama's sharp tongue at the, I think it was the National Press Association dinner. And President Obama mentioned about The Apprentice, and I don't recall the exact, but it was quite humorous. And the whole joint was laughing except for Donald Trump and his lovely wife. And he certainly did do everything he could to get some get back. And his followers have responded to his call to their lower natures of greed and envy and anger. He was able to appeal to that instinct, that base instinct that we all as people have, and we choose to dwell within it, or we strive for a higher condition of living. But we've got people who are just stuck down in that condition, and they are subject to that call to hate on others and to bring it back to a time when we didn't even have to worry about them because everybody was in their place, including the women. Everybody was in their place, and we ruled, and we were able to also make enough money to take care of our families and go on vacation, have a 2-week year vacation, purchase a camper and take the family out, to the woods and fish and hunt. And you were able to do all of that without even going to college. You wouldn't even have to graduate from high school. Actually, you were at the top and you could make enough money. These folks who've been appealed to and who are dwelling in those lower instincts of living are just like a lot of other people of color who just trying to get ahead, just trying to make it in this economy that seems to be tilted so far in favor of the wealthy at the exclusion of the middle class and those at the bottom striving to get to it. So there's an economic component about this. If people would only understand that we're in the same boat together, folks, the poor, the uneducated, the middle class, everyone is under attack, and people like Donald Trump are going all the way to the bank with the money, and people are confused about what is important in their living. And the people are basically sick. That's why they elect people who refuse to do something about the filibuster so that we can have a majority rule situation in the Senate. Nowhere do I know of where decisions have to be made by a 2/3 majority when the folks who make the decisions got elected on a majority, on a simple majority. So I got a whole lot of thoughts based on what everybody has said, and I could talk for the next half hour, but I'm not going to do that. I'll kick it back to the moderator.
Thank you so much. I'm reminded after hearing from all of you of a statement, and especially after what the congressman said. First Lady Michelle Obama says, when they go low, we go high. And some of you, especially Reverend Amantha and Rabbi Ellen, have already begun to propose some things that we can do to turn this thing around. Wolf Blitzer, in an interview with Jonathan Greenblatt, who is the CEO and National Director of the Anti-Defamation League, had a conversation yesterday, and they basically talked about the fact that Greenblatt said that every one of us has a role to play in combating, tackling, the hate, the polarization, the continued white supremacy. Every one of us, the voter suppression, every one of us has a role to play. And as I continually have conversations with men and women and even young people and children, what can we do? There are people who are waiting to hear what we can do. And so we need to give some wisdom. And so I'd like to hear from each of you as to what you see us doing to save our nation, because at this point, that is what it's about. It is about saving our democracy, saving our nation, saving our people, bringing us back together again, and overcoming the polarization and the hate, and learning, well, if I go any further, then I'll start talking about solutions. And so I want to hear from you first. Dr. Boone, I see your hand raised.
Oh, you do? That's fine. I'll take it.
All
Okay.
right, take it, sir.
I like Congressman, that was a mistake, but I will definitely get into, coming from the academy, one of the things that I observe is that there is a lack of emphasis in the American education system about the true nature of the United States, how we began. And one of the things that we failed to do, and you can see this being embedded in conversations today around critical race theory and other things about what is taught to our children in public schools, K through 12. And I think we need to begin there. I think we need to teach and begin to construct curricula that addresses what America really is and face those hard truths. I mean, let's take something as mundane as Columbus Day, to tell the whole truth about Columbus Day and how indigenous people were brutalized in that exploration period. We need to talk about those things. We need to talk about the fact that during the period of enslavement, certain things happened. We need to talk about the fact that women were not allowed to participate fully in the American democracy until 1920s, right? We need to talk about those things. In other words, we need to begin at the very beginning. Because see, I'm one of those people who believe that certain folk in Congressman Johnson's age category may be too late. But I do believe that there's hope for our children. And if we begin there and children begin to understand that because you come from a rather, let's say, sordid past, does not mean that you continue along that path. What you begin to do is offer solutions of how we move higher. I mean, one of the things that's always troubled me when I teach, and I look at American history and American political history in particular, is the fact that there's been this tremendous argument about who is a citizen of the United States. And that argument continues today. It manifests itself in the whole business of who can vote and who should not be able to vote. And you begin to define who is a citizen. Students should be able to understand how citizenship is attained and how it was defined early on in this country. Those are the kind of things that I think will help. Those, I think, will begin a building block in terms of where we're going to go. I mean, it may take a couple of decades, but nevertheless, we can build towards that.
Great, thanks.
Respond. Dr. Boone and Bishop Jackson's comments create a conflict in my head. I agree with both of you. I agree with Bishop Jackson that there's a lot of denial going on in the minds of a lot of people who want to suppress the vote. They are denying some truth about themselves. And then they're projecting what is true about themselves onto other people, like minorities. And then they are avoiding those minorities as their way of dealing with it. Denial, projection, and avoidance are Freud's definition of paranoia. Now, when I listen to Dr. Boone and what he has suggested, I inevitably think that he's echoing Archbishop Tutu, the need for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But then when I entertained that, I remember the race conversations that we had in Leadership Atlanta with Charles King leading the discussion between the Blacks and the whites in my Leadership Atlanta class. And I experienced what I know all of you have experienced in the integrated groups when the issue of race comes up. The Blacks do all the talking and the whites do the listening. That's another example of denial. So I would ask Dr. Boone, are you recommending that what you propose go on in integrated groups or just within ethnic settings, ethnic communities?
Oh, no, no, no. My suggestion here is that it's going to be for all. You know, and you may, you know, if you decide that, and I think I understand what you're saying, because there's a tendency in these questions about race in America to decide that the burden of this whole question has to be carried by Black folk. And that it is up to African Americans and other people of color to simply educate whites in particular. But I don't think that's our full burden. I think the burden rests with the entire country. I think all of us. I cannot see a curricula that would parcel out only going to Booker T. Washington High School and not have that same curricula about race in America, about relationships in America, about the history of America. Because there is no need, well, let me say it this way, that if you began to do it that way, we will not move. We will not move in a way that is positive in terms of moving the country forward. Because it seems to me that the question of race imposes itself, is embedded in everything we do in this country, it seems. There's nothing we can do or say that does not have an overhang, or the foundation does not come from the question of race and race relations in the country. And I think that we need to begin to face that. And the earlier we face that with our children, the better. And I mean with all of our children.
Thank you. I see that Rabbi Nimhauser and Reverend Barbie have their hand raised, so.
No, I was just going to say that definitely resonate with what Dr. Boone is saying, starting with children. I think also we have to be really concerned about our youth, not just young children, but our youth going up to maybe 25, 30-year-olds, watching what happened as far back as Al Gore with the election there, and then with what happened with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and then everything that came out of the Trump presidency. There's such disillusionment among these youth, and I'm actually really concerned about their feeling so disempowered they don't even bother voting. We have a problem, and we need to face. We need to, figure out methods to get our kids the education they need, the real education, and then our youth to somehow empower them to understand that when they turn 18, they have the right to steer the country in the direction they want to see it going by voting.
Yeah, you should remember that democracy is very hard work. It is very hard work, and voting is simply not enough. You have to participate at all levels in order for the democratic system to operate and to work.
I would piggyback on what Rabbi was saying. It's, we have to take responsibility. That's what this is about. We know at this time, in this day and time, our education system is failing as it relates to teaching the true history of this country. We talk about truth and reconciliation. Let's just stop at truth.
Yeah.
We are lying to ourselves and each other. We're lying in our government. We're lying in our classrooms. We're lying in our churches. We're lying in our synagogues because we have accepted it as fact. When we know something, as Dr. Hale says, when we started, we're pretty intelligent on this call. it is our responsibility to share that knowledge. If you know that our education system is not teaching a full history of this country, what other ways can we do that? I teach a class every Monday at my church, and I have a multicultural congregation about truth and how it relates to our scriptures, because we use even those to demonize one another.
Right.
But we have to be truthful about where we are, where we've been, and how that shapes where we're going. And we must do that together. And let me say this to my white siblings on the call. If this is making you uncomfortable, good. It is in the tension that you grow. Think about a guitar string. When a guitar string comes, it comes in a pack, it's wound up. It's not until you hook it to both ends and stretch it can you make it useful. We all have to stretch to serve this place we call home. We do have to sit in uncomfortable spaces, listen and learn. It's not about being argumentative all the time. It's about accepting, again, right back to what is true. Very much of the history of people of color in this country is written down. It's not difficult to find. But for us to hide it, to tuck it away, to pull it, or not include it in the curriculum is devastating to this country and to individuals. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we really want? And that's the look in the mirror that I would suggest that we all start with. Who is that staring you in the mirror? Who is that? And if that person is saying, you are and I'm not, or I am and you're not, something is wrong at the core. And when we can step out as individuals doing the very best that we can for our fellow siblings in this country, then we'll start seeing things differently. We'll do things differently. We'll answer questions differently. And we'll become a lot less argumentative when we are challenged by what our historic rightness is, not our real rightness.
Reverend?
Yes.
To relate what the Reverend just said, I want to use that as an opportunity to say something to the Congressman. This nation, decades ago, started eliminating the teaching of civics in high schools in this nation. So we have a whole generation that doesn't even understand how the government works. They don't know what a constitution is. The Secretary of Education needs to begin to get civics restored as another way of beginning to address what Reverend Barbie has said. Another point on what she has said. I don't know that many people know what a norm is. N-O-R-M. In contrast to a virtue, ethics, and morality, or a value. But this nation, like many others, is built on norms. Love is a norm. Integrity is a norm. Truth is a norm. Let's just comment on love. Love is not a virtue. Love is a norm. What is the difference? A norm makes the practice of all virtue possible. If you're not coming from a place of love, you can't be virtuous. Virtues are character values. They characterize us. Well, rather than going down the whole list, let me go right to the issue. Democracy is a norm. Democracy makes the practice of so much communal and civic virtue possible. Without democracy, you can't institutionalize equality and freedom. I'm going to stop there, but I want to say this about democracy. Religious communities, spiritual centers, seminaries, divinity schools, schools of theology are going to have to help their students and graduates develop a theology of democracy and talk about it as much as we talk about love and truth. Because democracy helps us respect the so-called other. Now, I know you all realize that the church is in trouble because it has lowered its voice to raise its budget. But we are going to have some real shifts. The temptation is to say more, but I need to shut up and let somebody else talk.
Well, I want to pick up where you left off, or a little before you finished. I want to go grab that word love again.
Okay.
Because when I think about what people of faith can practically do to change the course of our nation, the word love comes to mind. And of course, all of us know that there are several words for love in the Greek language, but the greatest is agape. Unconquerable benevolence, invincible goodwill, seeking another's highest good above one's own. And if we can begin to love with a sacrificial love, seeking another's highest good rather than a selfish one, if we can begin to see the other person as human beings made in the image and likeness of God, we might not like one another's actions, but if we can believe that one another is worth something because we are all made in God's image and likeness, the imago Dei. That love for me also looks beyond faults and sees needs and believes that all people can be redeemed. So even to sit down at the table of reconciliation, we have to begin to see each other for who we really are. Many of you have said this, but I just had to pick up on that because I think it's going to take democracy, but it's also going to take love. I like those two words you used, Dean Carter.
Well,
Professor Allen, I think, okay, go ahead. So whoever.
Well, let me connect them a little more there. Loving democracy, loving justice,
Okay.
loving mercy, and loving forgiveness. You know, I want us to think about it that way, because oftentimes we use love and we always associate it with another person, which is fine. But what about these principles and these virtues? Do we really love justice? And
Sure.
in loving justice, we also have to love mercy.
Mercy.
We have to love forgiveness.
Yeah.
And so
Compassion.
compassion, wisdom, and truth. Love truth.
Truth.
Right.
And understanding that, and this is where our faith part comes in, that God's truth is the absolute, but our understanding of that is always going to be relative. Our understanding of God and God's truth is always going to be relative, is we never find the absolute, but we always should seek it.
Thank you.
I think that was part of the problem a year ago, is that there's people who believe they own the truth. That kind of extremism has no place in America, has no place in democracy. Extreme points of view, extremism, whether it's religious extremism or political extremism, has no place in a democracy.
Right.
Professor Abramowitz, I'm gonna lay out a red carpet for you to jump in. If you don't, go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, no,
I wanted to jump in.
I was going to say that those are very fine, uplifting words that we heard from Pastor Hale. Unfortunately, I think we're dealing with some people right now in our country on the other side who don't care about love, and who don't care about truth.
Right.
And who basically what they care about is power and maintaining their status in our society. And so I think before we can get to reconciliation, those people have to be defeated. And that's going to be extremely important, because if they're not, and we have elections coming up later this year and in 2024, where, you know, if Republicans control the House and Senate, I'm speaking in my political scientist voice, okay? If Republicans win control of the House and Senate, which they very well might in the midterm elections, and then take back the presidency in 2024, things are going to get a whole lot worse. And so, I mean, on the other hand, let me add something a little more positive, which is the reason why we're seeing all these efforts by Republican legislatures around the country to move to suppress the vote. And in part, the reason why we're seeing all these efforts, by the way, to ban teaching of what they call critical race theory, which really means teaching the truth about our country's history in the schools, is because they're losing.
Yeah.
And this country is changing, as we've alluded to here, in ways that they feel very uncomfortable with, and they're trying to stop, but it's like sticking their finger in the dam, you know. I don't think it's going to work. And so what I would say the most important thing that we need to do looking ahead is, yes, speak the truth, of course, over and over again, but also organize, mobilize, get everyone to vote. We have a good model here. We can look back at what happened in Georgia in 2020, in both in the presidential election and then in the runoff elections for the 2 US Senate seats. And if we can do it here in Georgia, you know, we can do it across the country. Now, they're going to try to suppress the vote, yes, but you know what? It doesn't always work. Because when you try to tell people, and we've seen this over and over again, you can't vote, we don't want you to vote, they don't react by saying, okay, so we'll stay home. They react by redoubling their efforts. And that means voter registration, that means get out the vote, it means everything that we saw in 2020, and we're going to have to do it all over again. And you know, I think that we're going to be surprised to see that these voter suppression efforts, I think, are going to fail for that very reason. And keep in mind, the majority of the American people don't support this stuff. We're in the majority. Now, our political institutions are screwed up in a way that doesn't always get reflected in the outcomes of elections, right? But we're in the majority. Republicans candidates have won the popular vote in exactly one of the last 8 presidential elections. They've lost 7 out of 8 times. They lost the last election by 7 million votes in the national popular vote. There's a reason for that. So I think that's something we need to keep in mind going forward, and let's keep that streak going.
Well, you know what? I agree with you, Professor Abramowitz, that we need to get out and exercise this precious right to vote, regardless of the barriers that are put up. And those barriers can, in fact, be motivation and encouragement to people to overcome the obstacles and win, despite those obstacles. And I believe you're right about that. But I would also say that there are there's an incessant movement out there to discourage people from actually exercising that right to vote. That movement is spewing false information about who's doing what to whom and where. And people, the Democrats, and I don't want to make this partisan, but it's just a fact that Republican sources of information and foreign sources of information are pounding misinformation into the minds of folks via social media and other, basically through social media. And people are really confused, particularly young people. They're confused about who's doing what. They're getting a false picture, and people end up being swayed to vote against their very interests. And so we've got to deal with this misinformation that is out there. Also, it calls upon the people to seek out information from reliable sources and actually seek out information as opposed to just being a passive recipient of whatever comes across your screen in a 149 character message. And so we have a lot of work to do to help people understand what the truth is, how it affects them, and what they should do with their constitutional right to vote in response to it.
Congressman. Yeah, can I say, I'm sorry.
Don't you think we're in an unusual place now where we have to be partisan?
Well, yeah, on this call, this is an official call. So officially I can't be partisan. I can point out facts, but there's a fine line right there that I can't go over, and I don't want you all to go over either. I think we've been in good shape so far.
Can I make a comment here?
I said that because everybody in this conversation is aware that one of the cardinal rules of being a journalist is that you shouldn't be partisan. But now they realize they're going to have to take sides.
Well,
because democracy appears to be championed chiefly by one side.
That's right. It's
Well,
not,
I think,
it's not both sidism is one of the biggest problems that we have, this idea that we have to somehow balance what one side says with what the other side. But remember, there are some Republicans who are and they deserve a lot of credit for standing up to the lies. And then frankly, they're not the people I would have expected to necessarily, because I have a hard time saying this, but we really have to give a lot of credit to Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, because if they weren't on that committee, if they didn't agree to serve on that House committee, I don't think they'd be able to be doing the work, the very important work that committee is doing right now. And there are only 2 Republicans who are in the Capitol today when they held the ceremony to commemorate those who were lost in the attack. And the two Republicans were Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney. And that's kind of stunning. So there are a few Republicans, even here in Georgia, there are a few who are standing up, and we need to give them all the credit they're due for doing that, because it's not easy, and they're being ostracized, threatened, and we need to speak out in defense, in their defense.
But I think also we should be very careful. Certainly, Republicans are acting as a unit. They have been since the Trump administration, even prior to that. But I think also we should not fall prey to believing that the other side, the Democrats, are all in consensus about, let's say, something like the Voting Rights, Freedom to Vote Act, or the John Lewis bill for that matter. And I think it becomes very, very clear to me in terms, if there's a structural problem to be dealt with within the US Congress, it should be dealt with if there's a greater good to be served. If that greater good to be served is to deal with the whole question of voting, making voting easier for Americans and making it more open for Americans, then a rule that governs a certain body should not stand in the way of that. And we should not allow folk, no matter their party affiliation, to get away with that. We should speak to that question in a way that tells them very clearly that your party label does not protect you from being critiqued on this particular question. I think we do not want to fall prey to that. Certainly, the Republicans have stood firm under the leadership of Trump and McConnell and McCarthy in terms of opposing everything, no matter what. But we got to look at what's happening inside the U.S. Senate, a body that has a rule, a filibuster rule, by the way, which was enacted some couple of centuries ago to protect southern minorities to some extent. We know that. It helps the southern minority maintain certain controls within the Senate. But nonetheless, we have to be very clear on who we have to deal with, and not necessarily be enveloped or be to think that only Republicans are the ones.
There are two Democrats.
Yeah,
we
but
know right now there are exactly two Democrats who are the problem.
But first, I think you go further. If you were to look, let's raise the question of whether or not how many Democrats are prepared now to carve out an exception in the filibuster bill.
I think 48.
Back to, that takes us back.
48.
48, right?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. Then that takes us back. We have to push on that. Then we have to push on that and begin to test them. To see whether or not they're prepared to vote. Because when
they're going to be tested, it's going to happen. I think
the vote's going to come up, as you know.
Schumer's bringing it up.
Schumer's going to bring it up. He's going to bring it up. So we know that's going to happen.
By the 17th of
February,
January, Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday.
Yeah, January, right. So by King's birthday. So we'll find out. And let me talk about the other question too. I think the whole business about voter suppression is real. But I think one of the things that we must do is provide folk who are the victims of voter suppression alternatives, and not simply key in on just voter suppression. Say these are ways that you can participate in spite of this voter suppression, and present it in a more positive way as to how we can organize and move in a way to avert them. Because if we're not careful, we're going to find ourselves in this next election cycle with these laws being in place and folk being discouraged from voting because of voter suppression and not being able to get them out. So we have to begin to think more positively as to how we begin to educate people in terms of organizing and mobilizing, in terms of how we deal with voter suppression laws. That may be a reality in the next couple of election cycles.
Right. Let me just say that as we bring our discussion to a close, we actually have about 6 minutes before we have to close. And so I want to see if there's anyone who has another burning statement you want to make. We don't want to cut off anybody off. Yes, sir. Imam.
Yeah, well, I have a quick one. I just want to remind us, Rabbi Ellen has an advantage over most of us, that she has a strong Canadian heritage and everything. I want to remind us of what she said earlier, that January 6th should be humbling to us as a nation as well, to the point that we are more open to look at what other nations have gone through and what they are doing. So she listed Germany, Canada, and South Africa, how they dealt with these kind of uprisings or these kind of dilemmas that they went through. And so as we see ourselves as a leader of the world, but a leader of the world, this should have humbled us, where we are more open for exchange, give and take with other nations, and we can bring the whole world to more of a collaborative disposition. So I want us to be thoughtful of that as well, and not just think that all of our solutions are just have to be American made.
Thank you. All right, Congressman, you have the concluding word. I want to thank all of you for this wonderful experience and for all that you have shared. It's been my joy to be among you and with you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Pastor Hale. I want to give a big shout out to my colleague from California, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who I spoke with last week, and we happened to start talking about January 6th, and was I going to Washington, D.C., or was I going to stay at home and do an event at home? And I said, I'm planning on going to D.C. I hadn't even thought about doing anything at home. And she told me, well, I'm doing a panel discussion, and it's going to be interfaith, and it's going to be this, that, and the other. And I said, wow, that sounds really good. Can I steal that from you? And she went ahead to help us put this together. So I want to thank her for that idea. And she's not on the call now, but she does say hello to you, Pastor Hale. And I want to thank all of the panelists and the moderator for giving of your time to be on this call and to share your wisdom between us and with those who have been listening. We've been having a lot of chat going on. It's been between Democrats, Republicans, independents, secularists, and others. I'm glad that there has been this dialogue. I hope that it starts greater conversations. Each and every one of us, I hope that it inspires us to step out of our comfort zones and begin having honest dialogue and sincere communication with folks who don't agree with us and don't look like us, and who we have stereotyped as already having a certain view about things. I hope we can begin to broaden our perspectives and to be able to accept each other as equal human beings with the same qualities of good and bad. Each one of us has our lowest devils as well as our highest angels within our 6 foot or 5 foot bodies. And it's up to us whether or not to suppress or bring forward these capacities. And I hope that we will choose to extend ourselves and do something that feels uncomfortable towards someone else with a spirit of mercy and compassion, like we've talked about. We've gone over a lot of ground in this discussion. We all know that we need to get out and exercise that precious right to vote, no matter what anybody tries to put in front of us. And we know that that there are people in Congress trying to put in place the kind of legislation that will enable all people to be able to vote freely and easily. And so let's go out to the vote, and let's go out to the polls and elect people who share those values. And once again, I want to thank everyone for being on the call. This idea of American exceptionalism, America can be exceptional so long as she inspires that exceptionalism among all people of the world, and uses her position as the freest and most powerful nation to bring forth those qualities in others throughout the country and throughout the world. And so with that, Madam Moderator, I kick it back to you.
Thank you so much, Congressman. And again, thank all of you for participating with us. And those of you who are on the call, on the Zoom, either through Facebook Live or the Zoom webinar, thank you for your questions, your comments. We had a lively chat going on. I'm so sorry we couldn't get to your questions. As you could see, we had a very lively group of panelists as well. And so we wanted to give our full attention to them. And to close us out this evening, we're going to ask Dean Carter if he would do the benediction. God bless you all.
Let us pray. And now, may the accent of divinity within each of us, the great something which breathes through your breath, walks through your feet, loves through your hearts, and communes with your souls. May that high energy cause you to rest in the powerful rhythm of the mystic law that is carrying you home. May that buoyancy of cosmic spirit carry you on your unique journey to set the law in motion, to harvest real democracy, freedom, wisdom, and respect for everyone's humanity and solidarity rights. Grant us the courage to spread a pandemic of virtue, ethical leadership, love, and light wherever we go. Make us conscious gatekeepers of our thoughts and actions, but cause us to tremble when we remember that the universe bends toward justice, and that Carlyle and King were right. A lie cannot live forever. Make all of our interactions with each other conversations with ultimacy, with integrity, with equality, with Allah, with God. Send us forth from this gathering, loving life and knowing that life loves us, while we live in amazing grace and a perpetual state of gratitude, grateful for the spiritual teachings that anchor us in the storm. So be it, and so it is. Amen.
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 Be safe, everyone.
Thank you.
God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks to all.
Bye.